Right, good afternoon ladies and gentlemen, it's Antony Carpen here, and as you can see I am by a road sign that says Sedley Taylor Road. And the reason for turning up here is because in the archives I found a lot has come up around the turn of the century around this individual. And it turns out that Sedley Taylor was an academic at Cambridge, not surprisingly, and I believe trained to be a priest, and then decided to go back into academia. And one of the reasons why he became well known in these parts was he was one of a group of many civic-minded academics in Cambridge at that time who threw himself into the social problems of Cambridge. And just after Eglantine Jebb, the founder of the Save the Children charity, released her book on Cambridge, A Study in Social Questions back in late 1906, shortly after, Sedley Taylor went and made an offer to Cambridge Town Council, now Cambridge City Council, saying that he would pay for the dental examination of every single child at school within the borough, which was an incredibly expensive undertaking at that time. And he stumped up £500, which in today's money is over £15,000, and as that money was used by the council to not only deliver that treatment, but also to found the first dentistry, and it was the first municipal dentistry in the country. And so, as a way of saying thanks, we named a road after him. In fact, we named more than a road after him. We actually named a school, Sedley Taylor Infant School. Unfortunately, that school no longer exists. It shut down many moons ago. But he was, like I said, one of the very big civic names in our city's history. And in a strange way, it seems a shame that the only thing we've got to remember him by is this road. I want to say this road because actually it turns out it's this road, Sedley Taylor Road, is one with houses that are probably some of the most expensive in East Anglia. Basically, if you're trying to buy a house down this road, it will set you back at least 7 figures. That said, because we've got a general election coming up in a few days, it doesn't mean that everybody who lives down this road is a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. In fact, historically, far from it. Because down this road, opposite the other side of the houses that way, are some playing fields which are owned by Hills Road Sixth Form College. And during my childhood we used to play football on those pitches, because in those days you could actually get in. There were no gates to stop us, whereas now there are big electric gates because they spent lots of money on floodlights and a new pavilion. Which, wonderful as the facilities are, it's a shame that the kids can't go and play there like we used to. But we also used to do football training there as well. And so with that, plus also this being a road I used to deliver newspapers down back in the early to mid-90s, you'll also find that you've got big Lib Dem boards, and also back there we had some big Labour boards. So despite the fact that you've got some very wealthy houses and individuals who live down here, it doesn't automatically mean that they're going to go and vote Conservative. In fact, when these houses were first built, around the time Homerton College was expanding, just after they had moved up from London, many of these homes would have been built mainly aimed at the academic community more than anyone else. And I'll show you what I mean by the the gates. Well, fortunately they're open because I think there's a cricket match on, at which point they then become open to the public. So like I said, we've got Sedley Taylor Road this way, and for some reason, and I'd never worked out why, but our football trainer at the time, Mr. Andy Ross, he always called these playing fields, he said, well, we're going to have training up at Luard Road. And I always thought, well, this is Sedley Taylor Road. I never quite found out, and apologies for the breeze. We never quite found out who Mr. Luard was, but I'm sure at some stage soon I will be finding out who he was. And here we go. A few years ago I came and filmed a rugby match here. And so what we have here is, this is the rugby pitch which the Canterbury Rugby Club play on, and you can see Long Road just over there, and you can see the floodlights, the advertising hoardings, and that's the railway line that takes you down to King's Cross and Liverpool Street. And so what we have, if I just flick the camera back, is behind me, this is the new pavilion that they spent at least £1 million on, and then the playing fields that you can see behind me just there, this was all open to everyone. And in those days nobody seemed to have a problem with it. So it's something that I've picked up kind of at a local level as something that as a community we need to get together and say, can we reopen the playing fields back up to the community in a way that can both deal with the concerns of the institutions that own it and run it, because there's those floodlights and the pavilion didn't come cheap, while at the same time allowing local residents and the communities access like we used to have back in the day. My take is we've got the technology for it, whether it's swipe cards or whatever. I'd like to think that the grounds here, also dare I say it, the playing fields at the Stephen Peirce School, kind of like a block over from behind the camera, and also Homerton College, in particular Homerton College, because again historically they were and still are a major civic institution in this part of the world. And at the moment I think they are not reaching their potential in terms of the sorts of civic engagement that they could be doing, but at the moment aren't. So something to think about after the election, in particular mentioning that when you look through the archives and the history of Homerton College, you had a number of very well-known individuals who had a huge impact on our civic history. To give you one example, I think the first woman principal of Homerton College was a lady called Mary Allen, and she was so influential in terms of what she did both at Homerton College and for the teaching students there, that they named a big building after her, and it's called the Mary Allen Building, and it's built on what used to be our athletics track for our primary school sports days, because back in those days the surrounding primary schools here would take advantage of the huge open spaces that they have and have their sports days there, and mine was one. Now, what Mary Allen did was she directed a number of her teaching students at Homerton towards social action and civic action, and one of those students was a woman called Lisa Perrott. Sorry, not Lisa, Leah Perrott even. Now Leah went and married a chap called Mr. Manning, and thus became Leah Manning. And Leah trained obviously as a teacher and went to teach at a school called New Street, which was being also used by Homerton College to train some of its teachers, and you can see that through the foundation stone on the original building that still exists. That building is now used by Anglia-Ruskin University for their music therapy centre, and it's also where my music group rehearses. Now, one of the things that happened when Leah was teaching even was that such was the grinding poverty that her students were living in. Not students, because they were primary school kids, they were little uns. They were living in such grinding poverty just off East Road that one of the girls in her class died of malnutrition. And this was around the same time that Eglantine Jebb was doing her research, and also around the time Sedley Taylor was saying, okay, I'm paying for the dental fees for all of the children at all of the schools in all of the council-funded schools in Cambridge, of which New Street would have been one. And so that gives you an insight into how the great and the good really wanted to deal with poverty. And like I said, it was proper grinding poverty in those days, because as Eglantine Jebb stated in her book, Cambridge had an infant mortality rate of 1 in 8. Now, given that's averaged and spread across the city, and somewhere like East Road, that would have been even higher, which is frightening to think. Now, many of the slums in East Road have since been cleared, but one of these days I'm going to get hold of an old map of Cambridge to find out actually what the road used to be like, because where you've got now Anglia-Ruskin University and the St Matthew's estate, it was there that the old slums of East Road used to be. And certainly, as far as I'm aware, I haven't found that many photographs, let alone maps of what that part of town actually used to look like. But my point being, with all of this, is first of all, Sedley Taylor wasn't alone when he did this work. Secondly, there were more than it was more than just one group of people dealing with this, and we're starting to see around the turn of the 19th, 20th century a number of institutions, including academic institutions, really taking an interest in the social issues of the city. And then finally, and this is what's really striking about Eglantine's book, Eglantine's kind of like a personal hero for me, is that they start questioning the role of charity as a means to dealing with social problems. And one of the lesson really from the work that they did was that they tried Victorian style philanthropy to deal with the social issues of the day, and they found that Victorian style philanthropy was not nearly enough. And this was the conclusion that Eglantine Jebb came to, and also Florence Ada Keynes. They came to the conclusion that the idea of the rich should give to the poor, give to charity, but not be questioned as to how they got rich, no longer held. And that, it was one thing to give food to the poor, it was another thing to ask why the poor had no food in the first place, and start looking at and taking on the structural problems as to why they were poor and why they had the huge wealth inequalities in society that they did at the time. Now, fast forward to today, and the worry from certainly those, shall we say, of a left of centre and onwards political persuasion, in the face of growing extreme wealth inequalities that we've seen in recent times, and you compare the wealth of the top 1% or the top 0.1% with the fact that between 2010 and 2017, the year I'm in now, food bank use has risen from about 40,000, I think it was, in 2010 to over 1 million today. Doesn't reflect well. And interestingly, at the Haddenham hustings for southeast Cambridgeshire recently, we were in, I think it was Trinity All Saints, or Holy Trinity Church in Haddenham. I can't remember exactly the name which, but one of the parishioners there said to all of the three candidates, Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrats, my parish every week collects donations of food for the local food bank, and food bank use has risen quite dramatically in the past few years. Is this something that we should be proud of or something we should be ashamed of? Which I thought was a splendidly powerful question. And to find out their answers, you'll have to watch the video. Anyway, coming back to the main road, so I shall love you and leave you. Ciao, ciao.